Hello and welcome into episode 48 of the Stomp the Bus show. I'm your host, Mark Harris, and Colton. Is there anything going on in ASU world right now? Seems like there's just really not that much to talk about.
Yeah, I honestly didn't want to come on because I thought this would be a pretty mellow show. The news cycle's been pretty slow, uh, and I mean, I'm not a huge fan of just kind of chatting with you. So
Thanks.
yeah, I almost didn't come on, but I'm here. I'm contractually obligated.
All right.
So yeah, glad to be here. I guess, Mark.
Glad you didn't hold out. Is it just because you didn't want people to see your mustache, or is that part of
Well,
the
no,
equation?
that's actually why I came on is because I
Oh,
wanted
okay.
to show the world the decision that I made on my face. Because I'm very proud of it. I think it looks great. Um, and I'm sorry you don't feel the same. You're going against the consensus, though. I want you to know that.
Yeah, I'm sure. All right. Well, it's been a crazy day in Sun Devil Nation. ASU is looks like it's heading to the Big 12. Uh, it's not official yet, and Arizona is further down the road. At Pete Thamel just reported on ESPN sources, Arizona deal with Big 12 expected to be finalized soon. So they're further down the road. Obviously, Colorado left last week. And in the meantime, following Colorado's departure, the Pac 12 presidents were presented the final TV deal offer, which was exclusively on Apple, and it was 20 million, about 20 million per school, which could be exceeded if subscriber metrics or goals are reached. And I think that was the that second part is
Yeah.
why we are where we are.
It also I was reading that the deal that was presented was supposedly like a shorter term deal as well.
Yeah.
Whereas the Big 12 just signed their deal through 2031, I think it is. Um, so I don't know. I'm sure the money wasn't there. I'm sure the duration of the deal was a little underwhelming. Just seemed like the
It's the
second
money.
that
It's the money. I
yeah,
feel like it's the biggest thing.
yeah. And I think the second that deal was presented is when people really started or schools really started talking about jumping ship. And we've already seen Colorado, AS or not ASU, but U of A is all but confirmed at this point. Um, which I mean, based on everything we've been reading, means ASU is essentially confirmed, and then Utah is right there with them. So
Yeah.
it seems like four of those Pac-12 schools are going to the Big 12. You already have USC and UCLA in the Big 10. Um, who
It
knows?
looks like Oregon and Washington are going to the Big Ten as well,
Yeah,
or are in talks of going to the Big Ten. Um, and then yeah, and this is what sucks about this is that Wazoo, Oregon State, Cal. I'm not even going to throw Stanford in there because they don't have enough fans to care. But those schools and then the diehard Stanford fans, they get screwed over, and it sucks.
yeah.
And this is why ASU has to move because Big 12. It's either Big 12 or the what's left of the Pac 12 or the Mountain West. And so this is
Yeah.
there's reporting from CBS Sports, Brandon Marcello, that basically, uh, like yesterday being Wednesday, Michael Crow had to be like convinced to go to the Big 12, which is so frustratingly on brand. But you know what? Let's just kind of get past all that for a minute and just like ASU's 99% in the Big 12. Like, what are your thoughts on it? Like, it's just let's just kind of. I don't want to get into talking about the death of the Pac-12 and how it all led to this point because like everyone's done that. We know what happened. We talked about it
Yeah.
ad
And
nauseum.
we've literally been talking about that since we started this show.
Exactly,
Like our
exactly.
first episode was talking about the new Pac-12 TV deal, and I think we discussed possible conference moves, but I don't know how real that all felt at the time. I think we both assumed that, like, you know, based on the sentiment around the
Oh, got a little technical difficulties there. But it's just it's crazy how this all happened, and in some senses it's not that crazy at all. Oh, there you are. You back?
I think. I don't
Yeah,
know. Did I cut out?
Yeah, but anyway, keep going.
Okay, I was just gonna say, like, obviously we've discussed it extensively from the beginning of the show, but in terms of like what it all means, it's just there's so much to unpack, and I think the biggest thing that stands out to me is just from the outside looking in. Obviously, I have no reporting on this. I haven't done anything in terms of like um, substantiating this feeling or anything. This is just kind of from the fans' perspective. It seems like U of A's urgency to join the Pac-12, at least on some level, rests in creating that basketball super conference that the Big 12 would become if U of A joins those ranks. But I also think, and we've seen this with what's going on at the with the Arizona Board of Regents, and you talked about Michael Crow's reluctancy when it came to jumping ship. We honestly have U of A to thank for this to an extent. I don't know. I don't know how.
Absolutely. We specifically have.
I don't know if this gets done without the pressure on Michael Crow, because everything coming out of that meeting was he was very supportive of the Pac-12, even in that meeting on Tuesday.
Yes.
Which
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Let's just be thankful that it's like this isn't actually going to stop them from getting in. And just the fact that ASU is such an enormous school, in a huge TV market, like circumstance and Robert Robbins, Arizona's president, kind of pushing the way and being, because the thing is, like, I don't think Arizona didn't want to leave the Big 12 or the Pac-12 either, but there comes a point where you just have to, and Arizona had more urgency about it than Arizona State. And
absolutely.
Look, I mean, this is like Michael Crow is the reason why Arizona State sports have been just, it's just like, I don't want to say terrible because that's not accurate, but they haven't been living up to their full potential. I'll say that. He just doesn't care, or he doesn't care / thinks he knows what he's doing, and doesn't know what he's doing. And yeah, I mean, we literally have Robert Robbins to thank for this, because Michael Crow, I mean, the fact that even just as of Wednesday, he was still so confident in the Pac-12. It's like, dude, like, it's over. Like, it's over. Yeah. And there were probably chances to save it within this past year. I saw a story that I think it was Yahoo Sports' Ross Dellinger, that the Big 12 tried to merge with the Pac-12, and Pac-12 said no, and it's like, of course that happened. And apparently the Pac-12 had the TV deal offered to them that the Big 12 currently has, and they turned that down. They overshot how much they were worth. And it's like, I don't know how much to put the blame on this on George Kalevkov, who definitely deserves a good chunk of it. But it's like, I feel like the presidents are the one telling him, like, hey, you should do this, you should not do this, So
Definitely.
From that perspective, it's just a comedy of errors. But from ASU being in the Big 12, it's like, I mean, we thought this could happen. This was always a possibility. And look, I've been on this show. Like, I did not want ASU to go back to the Big 12. I didn't. And today I'm coming here more relieved than I am like jumping for joy, excited, and people can have their, opinions on that, but it's overall, I'm just glad that we're here ultimately, like, or almost certainly. I really, really wish that this was like basically decided before we started recording, but I'll share some tweets in a few minutes that kind of detail why I think we'll be fine in terms of going to the Big 12. But the thing that I do like about this, and I like beyond just the fact that you're remaining in a Power 5 conference, you're joining a better basketball conference for sure. I like that there is still going to be some regionality, at least for ASU, because you have U of A is in the conference, BYU, easy to get to, still regional. Utah is almost certainly going to be in as well, so that's 3, and then Colorado, and then it's like, okay, sure, like Texas is a further away, but it's like Texas Tech. That's not that far. That's not crazy for you of ASU and Texas Tech to be rivals geographically. All the other Texas schools like Baylor and TCU and Houston, it's not that far to get to those schools. And then you throw in Oklahoma State in there too. Kansas and Kansas State, that's a little bit of a stretch for me, but I mean, you were in the same conference with the Northwest schools, and that's not very close either. So
yeah,
I
mean, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's like you're driving east as opposed to north in terms of like the distance, right?
So and you go north for Utah and Colorado and BYU, but yeah, it's the same.
It's still like the northwest, but yeah, exactly. I don't know if geographically it makes like a huge difference. It's almost like, I don't think I think USC and UCLA are in way worse of a position in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. Geographically, it doesn't like defy all logic.
No. And the other thing is, again, it's 3 teams that you've already played a bunch in the Utah, Arizona, and Colorado. And then BYU, you've played a good chunk of times too in the past.
Same with, Texas Tech.
Texas Tech,
Texas Tech, Oklahoma State. They had the home and home with Oklahoma State the last 2 years. I mean, it's not like they're unfamiliar with these schools in terms of like non-conference stuff and things like that. So yeah, I don't think it's like a huge.
Now it is kind of. I would feel so much. For whatever dumb reason, like it would be a lot better if like some of the Eastern time zone schools were not in the Big 12. Like just. Cincinnati, West Virginia, and UCF. It's really too bad none of those schools could have just gone to the ACC.
Okay.
But
yeah,
it is what it is.
Which schools are East Coast? I completely blanked on those teams in the Big 12.
UCF. Well, okay, so I said Eastern time zone because West Virginia and Cincinnati are not East Coast, but they're Eastern time zone.
No, that's what I meant, like Eastern time zone. Yeah.
And then UCF as well, and then there's Iowa State in the old Big 12. So it makes no geographic sense to be in the conference with those schools, but the rest of the schools, I mean, that's still 13 other schools that make some semblance of geographic sense. So it's like, all right, or not 13, 11 other schools.
Yeah, there you go.
If you take out the 4 and then yeah.
Are they going to rename these conferences?
They should.
Like
the Big Ten hasn't. The Big Ten's been at 14 teams for a while, and they haven't. And then they're going to add 4 West Coast teams.
I mean, they're about to be at 18.
If they add Oregon and Washington, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how long you can be the Big Ten when you've almost doubled.
No, I know. But I guess if you think about it, like they've been the Big Ten this entire past decade when they've had 14 teams, and people just. And it is a brand, so I get it. The Big 12, I don't know. The Big 16 sucks. I don't know what you could call it though. Like.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's like you lose the brand recognition. It's just like I guess.
I mean, I don't care about the Big 12.
It probably doesn't bother most people. It just annoys me.
Yeah, no, I get that. But like I do like that. Like. You still are playing teams in your region. I think that's important, and it's not like. I mean, look, if we went to the SEC, that would be great, but it would feel very out of place. ASU does not feel out of place in the Big 12, and there's no like blue blood football program in the Big 12. Obviously, you have TCU, who made the national championship. BYU won a natty in the 80s. If you look at Washington should have gotten that. There's a lot of, I'm not going into that, but regardless, BYU has a strong football history. Kansas State has a strong football history. Baylor has a strong recent football history.
Yeah.
Oklahoma State with Mike Gundy, good football history. West Virginia does have a good football history, not in the Big 12, but overall. UCF, good recent football history. Cincinnati, same thing. Houston's been up and down. Texas Tech is kind of, Utah, good football history. And then Colorado won a national championship, but they're weird because they've been just awful for 20 years. Kansas mostly stinks in football. And then you have like Iowa State, Texas Tech.
Kansas was fun last year. I remember their little run. It was like what, the first 4
or
5 weeks of the season?
They
were a fun team. I don't know. They might be building something over there.
Oh no, I think they are. I'm just saying, like, if you've been that bad of a football program for basically your entire history, I'm not just going to wipe it away because you went 6-6 one year. You know?
No, I completely agree. It was more of like a personal observation. I was just thinking back to that.
They have Jalen Daniels, their quarterback, is good, and they have a good coach. Like, I think they really are turning it around. But anyway, my point with this is there's not a USC, there's not an Oregon that has been. They've been like they played in 2 national championship games, and then Washington's been really good, has a good history, and won the national. Like those 3 teams, like they just have more resources. They're set up to be better than ASU. But ASU.
No. Sorry, go ahead. Totally.
ASU has the chance to rise up in this league. Will they do it? I don't know. Look, we talk about Michael Crow, and I've mentioned his age on this podcast before, that he's 67 years old. And my point with that being is, like, he's not going to be the school president forever. Someone will eventually come in, hopefully someone who has just better, more
cares about sports,
more current views on college sports, or just doesn't have his own, this is the way it should be, or doesn't have her own version of that. Like, just anyway, supports programs and engages the fan base and all that stuff. And that was the key of ASU succeeding whichever conference they're in. So that's not really a Big 12 point, but it does, like, there is opportunity to kind of establish yourself as an upper tier program in this league.
100%. I couldn't agree more. That's actually what I was going to say too, is I feel like the Pac-12 was so top heavy in terms of, like, every year it was Oregon, Washington, Utah, recently USC, but like those, it was always, Utah's been in the Pac-12 championship for like each of the last 3 or 4 years. Like, I feel like with the Pac-12, it was so hard to crack that top 4 or whatever it was. Whereas with the Big 12, we just saw it with TCU, right? If you play your cards right, so to speak, in this conference, it's pretty easy to turn things around quickly or rise to the top quickly. Kansas State has been
they won the league.
They've had a high floor for a long time. But Baylor, right? Baylor after the Art Briles era was at the very bottom. Matt Rule turned them around, and now they're where they are, right? So this is a conference where you're not really like doomed to mediocrity. Not that ASU, I guess I said not that ASU was, but that's kind of where they've been mired in it.
Yeah. My thing is, I do think that, like, I don't want to absolve ASU of its past failings in the Pac-12, because I don't think it's all like, oh, they had these better teams holding it down. I think a lot of it was ASU doing stupid shit on their own.
Yeah.
The 2021 football season is like a perfect ringing example of ASU getting in its own way, because that season, that was the year they went 8-4, but obviously they lost in BYU. Like, they didn't even practice crowd noise, basically. And then there's the Utah game that they just completely were flat in the second half. Wazoo, they totally didn't show up, and then they lose on the road to Oregon State. And there's a 10-2-ish team, or even maybe possibly an 11-1 team that goes 8-4 because of terrible coaching. that's ASU getting in its own way because they beat Oregon. They didn't play Oregon. They beat Washington and they beat USC that year. And both those teams were having really down years that season, but they beat them and like they weren't roadblocks that year. And so my point in this is, yes, ASU has the ability, we think, to do good things on the football field and like kind of break through, but even though you're leaving the Pac-12, that all the same issues you're taking with you to the Big 12, even though there is less of a behemoth in the Big 12, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%, and I completely agree with that. That's a huge portion of this that needs to be addressed. Hopefully, it feels like ASU will never stop doing ASU things. Hopefully, I'm wrong, but
that's why I brought up Michael Crow. And look, I hate being like ageist and morbid here, but like he's not going to be the school president forever. I know that it seems like he will be, but anyway, I don't want to talk about that too much on this, but yeah, I mean, it's the thing with football that is interesting is at this point in the Big 12, there are no just complete crappy teams that you can just roll over, like we've seen Arizona like that. Colorado, we've seen like that in the past. Wazoo, there have been years that. Cal, there's been years that. Stanford last year, even though we didn't beat them, but we were that last year, although that was kind of an outlier for us. But in the Big 12 right now, I'm going to specify right now because Kansas is still in the league and they've had awful years. Iowa State's in the league. They've had awful years. Colorado is joining the league. They've had awful years. So it's not like, and you have, UCF, Houston, and Cincinnati who haven't played, Power 5 schedules. And so it's a whole different ballgame. Just ask Utah. They took a while to adjust. But my point with this is, while there may not be like the USC, the Washington, the Oregon in the Big 12, there also right now there aren't really any gimmies on your schedule either. So I feel like the schedule, like if ASU was going to go 7-5 in the Pac-12, it might do it in a different way than it would going 7-5 in the Big 12.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good point. It's going to shift tremendously, I think, in terms of like you said it, and we kind of walked through each of the teams that have occupied that role in the Pac-12 of like, I guess the doormat or whatever you want to call it, just kind of walk all over. But I mean, historically, there have been teams like we kind of just described it with Kansas and Iowa State, things like that. But none of these schools are really in a place where they're going to be kind of, which might be good because, you might not walk in and take anybody lightly. You should develop this mentality where you have to show up for every single game, which could make you stronger. Who knows? But it'll definitely be an adjustment. It'll be interesting. I mean, conference play is going to feel really weird when it's Kansas State, Texas Tech, Iowa State versus, Washington, Cal, Stanford. It's going to be an adjustment. But I don't know. I'm excited for it. And I'm excited. I think the thing that got me, the element of this entire saga that has me most excited is the accessibility and being able to actually watch them play as opposed to like, noon kickoff, Wazoo, ASU, and it's on the Pac-12 network, which is
you have to figure something out. Yeah, you got to legally stream it, go to a sports bar and hope they have it there.
Yeah, and nobody ever does. The Pac-12 is nowhere. Pac-12 network, I mean. So the accessibility is something I'm really looking forward to, being able to, just turn it on the ESPN app or whatever it is. Will be really nice. So that'll be good.
Absolutely. It's still kind of like sinking in over the past few days, but I'm just, a part of me is relieved that it looks like we're either making the right decision or being kind of forced to make the right decision, honestly.
Yeah. I think being forced is a better way to put it.
Really. Yeah. But like, who cares? Who cares how it happens that you get into a conference or not? Like, it's all of that stuff. Like, I can't wait till we're on this show and we're just not talking about all of this bullshit. Like, And it's probably going to be a while because there is a lot of stuff to uncover. ASU hasn't actually joined the Big 12 yet. So, we can't, it's not done until it's done. And Michael Crow is the ultimate Pac-12 truther. And it's ever so evident this past week that that's the case. But I think it's just, there's no other options. And look, they need to take it because if they don't take it, then Oregon State or Washington State will take it. That's the thing. Mm-hmm. So then you're even more screwed. And then you have your alumni just wanting to then say goodbye to donations, say goodbye, all this stuff. And I know they just got a stadium naming rights thing done yesterday, which some people were mad about that, but it's you can't be an ASU fan and complain about not having enough money. And then they get more money from something because it's a pretty, I think they get $4 million per year from it. And then, complain. It's you know what? It is what it is. And
what were the complaints? What were the complaints rooted in? Was it
was just it's just the same thing that happens whenever a stadium that has a specific name gets changed to corporate name, but it's I don't know. Look, Sun Devil Stadium's a good.
Who cares what it's called?
I know.
Call it Sun Devil Stadium. It doesn't matter.
Exactly. Very few of you are actually writing the recap or putting the date line on Mountain America Stadium. It is what it is, and it's just there's a lot of things bouncing around. One thing that I do really am going to like out of this is not having to defend the Pac-12 anymore, not having to be embarrassed by it anymore, not having to worry about it. It's done. It's done. I don't have to care about how many Pac-12 teams get in March Madness and be embarrassed that it's only 3 and be annoyed that no Pac-12 team has made the playoff. And the funniest thing is if it happens this year, that would be the funniest thing. If you get an undefeated Washington or USC that makes the playoff, and it's of course, this is when it happens.
In the final year of the Pac. Yeah.
That would be that would just be hilarious. But
let me ask you this. This is something that I'm thinking about because I feel like the only 2 dominoes that haven't had any sort of update related to them in terms of realignment are, at least I haven't seen anything. Maybe you have. Right. Wazoo and Oregon State, obviously, smaller schools in smaller portions of the country, right? The Washington-Idaho border. And, yeah. What I texted you about this the other day is it the Mountain West? What if, and this is so far-fetched, but if we're spitballing things, I wonder if it's viable just off the top of my head. What if Oregon State and Wazoo, but obviously this would change the entire landscape of any sort of TV deal and things like that. What if they went out and they invited 8 new schools to join the Pac-12 and just rebuilt it?
Well, they might, but I mean that.
What are their options here? Is it only the Mountain West?
I think it's the Mountain, because if you invite if you backfill the Pac-12 with a bunch of Mountain West teams, then sure, it's a different name, but it's still going to be regarded as that type of conference, So I think
it won't be a Power 5.
No,
obviously.
So I think it'll look. Maybe the Big 12. Maybe one of them will end up in the Big 12 somehow, but I expect them to be in the Mountain West, and that is why I hate all the people who are rooting for the Pac-12 to die and grave dancing on the Pac-12, and it's okay, congrats on cheering on the death of Oregon State and Washington State. That's what it is. If you want to make fun of Cal and Stanford, fine, but Oregon State and Washington State, that's what, in my opinion, that's what really separates college football specifically from the NFL, is that, because guess what, Alabama and all these teams that have all these assistants and just, they kind of are mini NFL teams already. Even as much shit as we talk about ASU and ASU, they have a ASU players right now are living better than 80s NFL football players. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well, in many ways, probably they aren't doing like cattle steroids, I would hope. But what I mean by that is like ASU was like nice facilities and a huge state and a big state, like and all this stuff and like specialized meals and all this stuff. And obviously Oregon State and Washington State have some of that too, but like they're in like small little areas and you have to, it takes a while to get there. And like if Morgantown, West Virginia didn't have a team, or if they got booted from the Big 12, like that would suck. That would really suck. And it sucks when it happens to other teams, and it sucks that the Big 12 was in this position basically 2 years ago. But these little small towns, like it adds a different flavor to college football. And it's just so sad to see those teams most likely get left by the wayside. And it's all because of, look, like we can blame, there's Larry Scott, Michael Crow has a huge hand in this, other Pac-12 presidents, George Klavkoff, the Big 12, all this stuff. Like, those are all reasons the Pac-12 is dying, but it's really because ESPN and Fox are pulling the strings. This is all that this is TV. This is like,
Yeah.
do you think UCLA would have gone to the Big 10 if it wasn't for getting like money whipped by Fox? No, like UCLA has been like they've been like the I don't know, like the avatar for the Pac-12. Like they don't, their football stadium doesn't sell out at all. They care, basketball, and they have like all these, they're great at water polo and swimming and all this, and like that's great. And I'm not like, I don't have any issues with those sports, but that type of thinking is why the Pac-12 is where it is. So, in part, and anyway. But they get to move on because they're in a big market and they're UCLA, and that's valuable to Fox, and so there you go, they're on the Big 10.
I think if you're looking at it, and this is so probably not how anybody is looking at this in terms of realignment, but if you're looking at this from purely like a football perspective and bringing in teams that can enrich a conference, because obviously the Pac-12. If the Pac-12 dies, then it's the Power Four, or maybe even like the American, whatever. And then all of the smaller conferences, the Mountain West, these other conferences. If I'm one of those conferences and I'm looking at Oregon State and Wazoo, I think Oregon State would be a huge commodity to any of those conferences in terms of.
They both would be.
Absolutely. I mean, Wazoo too. They're always competitive. They're always like a high floor team is how I would describe them. You're never going to.
They have been in recent years, yeah.
Which, I mean, it seems Oregon State is the same way. They used to be kind of a doormat in the Pac-12 too, a while back, and now they've turned it around. But if you're looking at, like, as a Mountain West school with schools like Boise State and Fresno State, and there's, why am I blanking on the other one? Boise State, Fresno State, San Diego State, obviously.
Utah State, Colorado State, New Mexico, Wyoming. Yeah, Hawaii.
Yeah, all of these schools, Hawaii too. Adding an Oregon State, it sounds like, oh, they're relegated to the Mountain West or whatever it is, but that could become it already kind of has. That could become an even more competitive conference, which makes for compelling games to go turn on and watch. I think if the Mountain West adds those two schools, it's going to be must-see TV to an extent when you get the Boise States versus the Oregon States, or the San Diego States versus the Wazoos, whatever it is. I'm actually kind of excited for that if that ends up happening. That would be a fun conference to watch. But
we're both gamblers, so I think that helps too. But
yeah, maybe that.
So I actually would be really excited to watch those games too. The issue is the media payouts for the Mountain West are so much lower than what those schools even would have gotten from the Pac-12. And so that's the thing. And like you mentioned, Oregon State would be a huge ad. It's like they would be, but it's like, does Jonathan Smith leave Oregon State in the near future because they just can't keep up with the salary requirements? I mean, maybe he'll stay. Look, he's a Beaver for life, but I mean, it is a little different when it's like, oh, okay, it's not that you're not in the Big 10 and the SEC. we're not even in the Big 12 or the ACC, and that is an issue. And so,
Yeah.
like, that's why, like, I don't think it's good to tell a Wazoo fan. I'm not. This isn't what I'm saying you were doing, but like, tell those fans like, oh, you'll be fine. You'll be in the Mountain West. You'll be the best team. It's like, yeah, but like, this is gonna
Yeah.
destroy their athletic programs because they just won't have as
Yeah.
much money to work with. And so,
And I don't think they'll be fine. I guess I'm looking at it purely from like a competitive standpoint, which I guess is a little naive because this is not a
dude, I wish this was just about the competitive teams that moved
yeah.
on. I wish that's what it was.
It's the unfortunate element of this because that's what I mean is if you're looking at it from solely competitive or just fans of football or whatever it is, which is how I would be looking at it, those games would be so fun to watch and that would be a real fun conference. But money is kind of dictating all of this and it's leading to, you said it, possibly the collapse of some of these teams if coaches like Jonathan Smith decide to pack up and go elsewhere because of the landscape, which is the unfortunate reality of all of this. But who knows? This is an ever-changing landscape. Maybe I don't know. It's so dynamic, and it's like, how do you even project this? But it seems like those two, Oregon State and Wazoo, that's probably what's going to end up happening, right? Is Mountain West.
Yeah. And that's why I said earlier, like, I'm much more relieved than I am thrilled about this.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, it's awesome to get a lifeboat off the Titanic, but you also hate to see, two of your buddies get frozen in the ice behind you. And that's, like, they're still going to play football, but it may be a lot more difficult to schedule the Apple Cup now. And it may be a lot more difficult to get the game formerly known as the Civil War on the schedule and all this. And like, it's just, I just wish that college football had some real leaders in it or a real leader or just some sort of actual structure, like the reason why the NFL is so freaking popular is because every fan base has a chance and you can turn it around quickly. Like, look at the Bears last year. They were the worst team in the NFL. People are picking them to win the division this year. There's Justin Fields has ridiculous amounts of MVP votes, which I don't even get that at all. But
yeah, the Eagles went 4-11-1 in 2020, and they went to the Super Bowl last year.
Yeah,
they won the Super Bowl. They went 4-11.
They went
back to the Super Bowl in a 7-year span.
Yeah, exactly. Like and granted, like, obviously there's different things about the NFL that make that possible, but it's the structure of the league and
the parity.
Yeah, and sure, like, it's awful that these running backs are getting screwed over by the market. Like, it is awful. Like, I'm not saying the NFL is some perfect being, and like they do evil stuff all the time too. I'm not trying to but from a competitive standpoint, that's why the NFL is so popular, on top of football being a very popular sport in general. But it sucks, and it's all the TV companies doing this, media companies. I mean, I saw, I don't know, like, there's reports that we're not reports, but I saw rumors that like ESPN and Fox are just like, they lowballed the Pac-12 to keep Apple out of it, but I don't know. Although I will say this about Apple, like, if you really wanted to have the Pac-12, then you should have offered the teams at least $30 million per team, because then a lot of them would have stayed. Like, then ASU would not be leaving if that were the case.
But I mean, Apple's probably strapped for cash.
Yeah.
I just found this tweet talking about the dust settle. It's a Reddit college football tweet. When the dust settles, 2024 increasingly looks like this. And the interesting part is this last section. So obviously Arizona State, Colorado, Utah, Big 12, Oregon, Washington, Big 10. But then they're looking at Cal, Oregon State, Stanford, and Wazoo either merge with select Mountain West teams under the Pac-12 banner or go independent. So if those 4 teams end up staying in the Pac-12 and recruiting 6 of the Mountain West teams, I mean, that's kind of still, it's a step up for those Mountain West teams, right? Like, I don't
Yeah.
know if it's an option. It's probably not a great one, but
So like that's better than I guess going to the Mountain West, and that like that's probably better for Oregon. It's probably better for Oregon State and Washington State to be with Stanford and Cal, just because it's more power or former Power Five teams together.
right.
But it's still like they're still going to have the same ultimate problems, you know.
Yeah, you're
Like
still
maybe it
losing
gets
those
mitigated a little
rivalries.
bit,
So,
but
yeah.
that does kind of I wouldn't hate for that to happen. Like I want the best to happen to, you know, those 4 schools, but it's just sucks. I mean, look, this has happened before. You know, when the Big East broke up, not everyone had a landing spot in musical chairs. Look, I mean, that's why Cincinnati was in the American Athletic Conference and USF. Remember, they were in the Big East.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was considered a BCS conference, and all the teams kind of split up. You know, Louisville went to the Big 12, and West Virginia, Big 12. Or no, Louisville didn't go. It would have been better if Louisville had gone to the Big 12. That makes more sense. But so Louisville went to the ACC, West Virginia to the Big 12, Pitt to the ACC, Syracuse. I don't know. Yeah, Rutgers to the Big 10, which is still ridiculous.
I'm looking at these Mountain West schools, and honestly, if you're trying to, if you're those 4, let's say it's those 4, Stanford, Cal. This is a fun little exercise we're doing here, Mark. A little creative outlet for us.
That has nothing to do with ASU, but why
Yeah,
not?
we're gonna rebuild the Pac-12 right now as the Pac-10. Okay, so if you've got Stanford, Cal, Oregon State, and Washington State, who were the other 6?
So SDSU, Boise,
Yeah.
you add them. Fresno, UNLV, they stay.
What
Or they
about
move up.
San Jose State?
So do you or do you go after? I mean, look, the Pac-12 was going after SMU for some reason. So do you add SMU in North Texas and get into Texas? You know, I don't know. So
You could for sure. I feel like there's options. Like I feel like I'm looking at these schools and I'm like, there could be like UNLV in Vegas. Vegas is like one of the more booming sports markets right now. Like,
yeah, but dude, nobody cares about UNLV. Like, dude, UNLV's been bad forever. Like,
no, I get it, but if we're talking about money, if money's the big thing here, I don't know. I'm just.
I mean,
like
to your point, like these schools are going to have to get creative to milk as much possible money out of whatever Apple streaming service, whatever platform that carries their games. They're going to have to get creative.
Yeah.
So I hope it works out the best. Like I don't like that this is happening, you know, but it is what it is, and I'm glad that it's almost certain that ASU will be joining the Big 12 in the near future. I really wish it was decided this Thursday night, but it's not. I do want to get to this article that came out tonight from Pete Thamel. It's about Arizona. It says sources Arizona deal with Big 12 expect to be finalized soon. We know what the Wildcats are doing. I kind of want to shift it to the ASU and Utah, and so I'm just going to read a few paragraphs in this. The spotlight will quickly shift to Pac-12 members Arizona State and Utah, which could take a few days to come to a determination on their future. The Big 12 also has courted those two, the final of the 4 so-called 4 corner schools, but they've always been on a separate timeline from Colorado and Arizona, which both had meetings with the Big 12 in recent months before jumping aboard. So that is an important detail as to why ASU could kind of be moving a little slower in this. Both Utah and Arizona State have been more conservative in their approach, but sources say the tenor on that has begun changing recently with the flurry of events and realignment. ASU President Michael Crow has been a staunch supporter of the Pac-12, as he'd long been an advocate of former Commissioner Larry Scott, even after the league's trajectory went wayward. But the urgency of the league likely being reduced to 8 schools has begun to push Crow past his deep fidelity to the Pac-12. Utah, blah, blah, blah. More discussions are necessary for either ASU or Utah to move. Arizona State's direction could crystallize in the wake of the Arizona Board of Regents meeting, which is taking place on Thursday. The meeting, quickly move to executive session with no public discussion expected. The tenor from the Arizona Board of Regents, which oversees both schools, is that there's a preference that they stay together. The backdrop of this is that Arizona move comes with the Big Ten exploring Oregon and Washington as members. A potential move that increases the likelihood with each Pac-12 defection. While there remains some resistance from within the Big Ten and ambiguity over potential financing, there remains an appeal for the Big Ten to add 2 members at below a full share. So Pete Thamel kind of goes into it like it's really likely that ASU and Utah, for that matter, are going to join the Big 12, just kind of in a different timeline.
Yeah.
And I mentioned this. I don't know if I mentioned this on the show. This is from CBS Sports Dennis Dodd, a tweet. Now that Arizona is all but in the Big 12, expect ASU to be the next domino to fall. So hasn't officially happened. Chris Cartman, he's been on it. Sun Devil Source, I recommend everyone check out his stuff, whether it's realignment or actually football. Big 10 doing everything it can to make it clear to Oregon and Washington they'll be taken care of. Further greases the likely ASU, Arizona, Utah move to the Big 12. And then he goes on with some more stuff. So, and then this is from Stuart Mandel, and this just made me laugh. He's quoting the Brandon Marcello tweet of Arizona State's president kind of shifting his mind on Wednesday. He quotes it with, "Most schools that change conferences go in delighted with joy. ASU, specifically Michael Crow, will go into the Big 12 begrudgingly and semi-forced to."
It's crazy, man.
I can't, just the fact that that's like how this is going down is absolutely hilarious. It's hilarious because just him, Michael Crow being holding on to the bitter end, but ultimately you got to go, bro.
That's wild to me that he's just. It just shows how
But it's not wild though. That's like.
But that's what I'm saying. Is like it just shows how little he's in touch with like the landscape of college football, or not college, like college athletics.
Football. I mean, that's what this is about. Like, let's be honest.
Right. But just college athletics in general. I mean, we've talked about his stance on the basketball arena on this show before. Like every single thing that Michael Crow talks about as it pertains to like sports at this university, it's just like he could not be more out of touch.
Yeah. No, I know. We've talked about this forever, but
yeah, it's surreal.
Yeah. No, I know. That just so it's basically like, yeah, it hasn't happened yet, but it's going to happen from the national media and local media for that matter. So that's good. Obviously things could still happen that get in the way. This is Michael Crow we're talking about, but it seems all but done, or just very much it's moving in that direction. You mentioned basketball. Big 12 is a very good basketball league, the best basketball league. ASU is not a basketball school. We made the tournament last year and that was a success, but overall ASU is not a basketball school. Our school president said our 1975 arena is perfectly functional, and so he's not wrong that it's functional because the lights turn on and the plumbing still works, but it's unacceptable for a Power 4 school. What's your thought on ASU basketball or ASU men's basketball in this equation?
It's gonna be tough sledding.
Yeah.
I think U of A joining the Big 12 makes this like an absolute super conference for college basketball. I mean, you've got Houston, you've got Baylor, U of A,
Kansas,
all of the Kansas, right? Like I even almost didn't mention Kansas. Like it's just, and then you've got schools sometimes who have and Kansas State just went to the Final Four, right?
Well, and then you throw like Iowa State and West Virginia are good usually.
Yeah.
Texas Tech recently went to the national championship game.
Exactly. TCU just won a tournament game in back-to-back seasons. Like, it's basketball is going to be brutal. I'm looking at the crop of teams in the Big 12, and ASU is going to be one of the bottom 4 in this.
It looks that way.
Yeah,
the only kind of thing that I would point out in this is ASU will have a much higher margin of error in terms of schedule-wise in the Big 12, because if you lose a quad 1 game, it doesn't hurt you as bad as if you almost lose on the road at Cal, which if had they lost that game, they would have not made the tournament. And same with Stanford and Oregon State. Like you have some of these games in the Pac-12 where you absolutely just cannot lose it because you're playing a just absolutely horrible team. And if you do lose it, it completely messes up your metrics and all this. We're in the Big 12. I mean, there'll probably be some schools like that. Just, there's just so many schools that are joining the league, and UCF doesn't have some great basketball history, and Utah, same. But I mean, ultimately, like it's still going to be tough. And
I mean, you're going into with U of A in the Big 12. You have, let's see, I don't know. Was Baylor a 1 last year? Was Baylor a 1?
They were a 2. They were really high. Yeah.
Baylor was a 2. U of A was a 2. Houston was a 1. Kansas was a 1.
2. Yeah.
Kansas State went to the Elite 8.
They were 3. Yeah.
Like,
I know. Yeah.
It's going to be, basketball is going to be brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right with the margin for error, and we'll get more benefit of the doubt playing in such a tough conference for those, like, I guess, middling seasons. I don't know, but
like if ASU were to go 20-10 in the Pac-12, they're like a 50. They might make the tournament. If they go 20-10 in the Big 12, they're going to be like an 8 seed.
Yeah.
So there is that.
Exactly.
But
that is a good point. But like, how realistic is going 20-10?
No, I know.
In the Big 12,
I know. Well, because if you look at all the teams in the Big 12, like, how many schools is ASU basketball a definitively better program than? Not like year by year, like anything can happen in a given year, but just a better overall program. So I would say obviously not U of A, neither of the Utah schools. BYU and Utah both had been more successful, been better. I mean, at ASU, our ASU was like, just make the tournament. Colorado, I would say, is in our ballpark, but with Tad Boyle, they've been better. All of the Texas schools are better.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe Oklahoma State, but even then, like, it's hard for me to say that Oklahoma State is clearly behind ASU.
Right.
I would put Oklahoma State ahead of ASU.
Yeah. What about UCF?
That might be it.
Yeah.
That might be it, because Cincinnati has a good history.
Mm-hmm.
They used to be in the Big East, and then West Virginia, I mentioned. Iowa State has a better history than we do. And then both Kansas schools obviously do. So when you like lay it out like that, like, we are the second worst program entering the Big 12 in men's basketball. Yeah, and that could change. Like, not all of these schools have always been like, in basketball, you can make up ground a lot quicker. So
yeah. How does that impact like the urgency to sort of overhaul the program when you realize, like, okay, we are now in the Big 12, the best basketball conference? Like, how does that alter what ASU does on a year-to-year basis? You know what I mean? Like,
are you asking me how it should alter, or are you asking
I'm just kind of like thinking out loud. Like, at what point, like, how long are they going to be the basement dwellers that they're going to be in the early going? You know what I mean? Like, are they even able to dig their way out of it?
I'll say this right now. I'm glad we have Hurley as coach, and even with his flaws, this is why I'm kind of going back into this argument. But this is why when ASU fans bitch about Hurley, okay, who would you rather have be the head coach of ASU basketball right now that will do a definitively better job?
Yeah.
It's a slim list, and with Hurley, at least the teams are like going to compete. And in recent years, they have a defensive like energy, or at least this past year. And with him in the fold, I'm glad that ASU is in. Like, I'm glad that ASU is going to the Big 12 with him as coach. And I kind of feel the same way with Dillingham, but it's with football, it's a little different. Like if we were going in with Herm as coach, it would be like, okay, we're just going to be bad this year, and then we'll get a new. It's a little different calculus. But with men's basketball, it's going to be, it's going to be just you got to bring it all the time, and there's no cupcake conference games anymore. But at the same time, you won't get penalized as badly for losing one of those games. So that's good. But
it'll be wild. The next, I don't know, give it like the next 2 or 3 years in college football for ASU fans, college sports, basketball, whatever it is, it's gonna be wild.
Yeah, man. And yeah, it's. Oh, I saw this. Okay, this is on Chris Cartman's Twitter page right now, who is the 24/7 publisher for ASU. This is such a great quote. So here's a tweet of an article that he wrote, and it's a quote in that tweet, or whatever we're calling it now. I'm going to call him a tweet. Quote, "It's almost like he's being dragged across the finish line." Quote, "A person directly familiar with tonight's Arizona Board of Regents told me about their view of ASU President Michael Crow and the school's potential move to the Big 12. Dragged across the finish line. Go Sun Devils, baby. Go Sun Devils. Dragged across the finish line.
Oh man, I'm just glad. I'm just glad it's almost over.
I know.
You said it. Either way, dragged or sprinting, you're crossing the finish line, which is all that matters.
Like that girl from Somalia who ran the 100-meter dash despite not being an athlete. Did you see that?
I did not. That's crazy.
Look up, when we're done with this, look up Somalia track runner, and it's like, it was basically like the minister of athletics in Somalia, like, I haven't read the whole story, but for some reason they didn't have someone to run, or there was a mix up, and it was the guy's niece who ran in like the 100-meter dash for some event, and she finished 10 seconds behind everyone else. So it's like it's putting like the average Joe in the Olympics basically, but that's what ASU is in this. Like ASU is barfing on themselves. They signed up for the 401 or not the 401k. They signed up for the 5K, unknowing that they were drinking the night before, and it's like they crossed the finish line. They have crossed the finish line, but they are not happy about it, or at least Michael Crow isn't. But look, Michael Crow, this is the result of you supporting Larry Scott for way too long.
It's a good point, man. It's coming to an end, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, and you're lucky that you're the president of ASU and not Oregon State or even Cal for that. So
that's true.
Like, this is the consequence of. I mean, he backed Larry Scott in 2019. I know that feels. I mean, that was a long time ago, but by that point, everyone knew that Larry Scott it was not a good commissioner. So. Playing road games in Texas soon, Colton.
What'd you say?
Said we're playing road games in Texas soon.
I know. I can't wait to make the trip.
At least some of. So, like, okay, which Big 12 road game do you want to go to the most? And obviously, don't say like Utah or Colorado or Arizona.
No. For some reason, I'm thinking Texas Tech, but
they're crazy.
Yeah, I've heard their fans are bonkers, and I'd love to experience that. Kansas would be fun. Like they have a pretty good reputation too.
Well, for basketball.
Yeah, I would say Kansas or Texas Tech.
Okay.
Because like if you go to a Kansas game, in Lawrence, and it's like ASU has an actual chance to win that game. I don't know. I mean, Texas Tech maybe, but they're kind of on an upswing too right now. So
yeah, I mean, Texas Tech has been pretty mid over its history, though. So I mean, it's not like they're still really far away from civilization for the most part.
Yeah. I would say Kansas or Texas Tech. What about you?
Yeah, Texas Tech is up there. Baylor Stadium is really cool. So from that perspective, I would want to go to Baylor. So TCU and Houston are cool because you can just fly right in. But the school that comes to mind for me is West Virginia because it is kind of it's ridiculous that ASU and West Virginia are in the same conference. Like it's ridiculous, but they are. And
it's almost like Rutgers and USC.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, but from like it would be cool to go to West Virginia. Just it would be a completely different slice of the world, and they have a crazy fan base too. West Virginia football is like obviously enormous in the state of West Virginia.
Yeah.
And it's going to be an interesting. It's like I'm just kind of just setting in of all the teams you play and like. It's going to be a weird conference, man. It's going to be weird.
And I think we'll get more familiar with all of these schools too, like as time goes.
We're going to hate some of their fan bases, bro.
Yeah, like, I'm sure they'll get it.
Obviously, there's already obviously between ASU and U of A, there's obviously it's a rivalry. ASU and Utah fans that's kind of grown into a mini rivalry in the past 10 years or so. BYU there's a lot pretty easy to dislike that fan base.
Yeah.
Texas Tech, you mentioned. I think that'll be a quickly up there on the not liked list.
Yeah. It is weird how like you mentioned U of A, and I said this at the beginning, but like I can't get over the fact that they kind of saved us in this.
Dude, they have. Like on the presidential level, they are like if ASU is getting dragged across the finish line, U of A is doing the one drag.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like that's just how beautiful this rivalry is to these schools. Is they're like, no, whatever happens, we're doing it together, and Michael Crow's doing his thing. But oh man.
Well, that's what happened when in the late '70s when they went from the WAC to the Pac-10. It was Arizona who led the way because Frank Kush didn't want to leave the WAC because they were dominating it. That's better reasoning than Michael Crow not wanting to go because he wants to be linked up with Stanford's academics in some way. They're both bad reasons, but look, in both times U of A has led the way off the field. Now on the gridiron. U of A will be leaving the Pac-12 without a single Rose Bowl appearance. I just think we have to point that out. Even though ASU has only won the Rose Bowl once and made it twice, it's still better than not going literally any time at all. Might as well throw in here that U of A didn't have a player draft in the NFL draft for the last year either.
They have one last chance. U of A and USC.
Jaden Delora is going to lead U of A to a conference championship.
Wait, there's not still divisions in the Pac-12, is there?
No, there's not.
I thought they got rid. Yeah, it's just the top two. Okay.
Well, now that you're kind of, it'll be interesting to see what the divisions in the Big 12 or the pods or how they're going to split it up. I feel like it would be pods, and then you just have the Utah and Arizona schools in one pod. I saw that one version of it had Colorado, the Kansas schools, and Iowa State in one pod. I would love to be in that pod. That would be the easiest one of all, in my opinion. And then one that had Texas Tech, TCU, Baylor, and Oklahoma State in a pod. That would be a really tough pod.
That's brutal.
Yeah. And then one that had Houston, UCF, and then Cincinnati and West Virginia. So that's just kind of you have to be in a pod somewhere. So we're putting all you guys together. But
wait, so 3 pods?
Well, it would be 4.
Oh, okay. I only heard you say 3. All right, 4.
4, because it would be the Utah, Arizona schools, all the Texas schools minus Houston, and then add Oklahoma State in that pod. And then
Colorado would be in our pod too, right?
I don't think, no, I think Colorado would be with the Kansas schools and Iowa
Oh,
State.
BYU. My bad. I
Yeah,
blanked on
yeah.
BYU. Okay.
Yeah, because like there's 5 Western schools, but if you might as well just put Colorado in the one with the Plains schools, and then Houston, not Houston, West Virginia, Cincinnati, and UCF. They all go into one pod of. You guys have to be in a pod because you're kind of not close to anyone. So, yeah, but here we are. We made it. We are. It looks like we're going to be in the Big 12, and it's just kind of. I was hopeful that ASU was going to go to the Pac-12 deal was going to be good enough, and the Pac-12 was going to live on for another 5 or so years, and then we'd do this, in 2030 or whatever. But it's happening now. I really wish the whole media deal saga didn't get drug on for 13 months. I wish we were having this exact conversation in August of 2022 and not August of 2023.
Yeah.
Because it's all just been I don't even know the phrase, just running out the string on the Pac-12 for the last year. And it's just been stressful. And I mean, like I said, if you're an Oregon State fan or a Washington State fan, you're even more pissed off because A, you're not going to be in a larger conference, and B, you might have thought that the Pac-12 was going to survive for this past year, and there you go. So, yeah, it's crazy. It sucks. But ultimately, I'm relieved because Michael Crow was drug across the finish line, figuratively, and we live to fight another day. Do you have any kind of final thoughts as we wrap this one up, Colton?
Yeah, I don't know. There's just one thing sticking with me earlier that's kind of giving me anxiety, and it's when you were like, anything can happen with Michael Crow.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just like it's probably done, but with this guy, it's not done until it's absolutely done. You know what I'm saying?
That's true. No, that is true.
So hopefully the news comes out sooner rather than later, and we're secure. We have a place to play, and that's the end of it. But I mean, with Michael Crow, for some reason, you have to leave that door just slightly cracked for anything to happen. But we'll see, man. I think it's gonna happen, but like I've been burned before, so I have to.
Yeah.
I have to leave that door slightly cracked, but I mean, hopefully we get news like next week or something that it went through.
Yeah.
So,
Ideally, it would be on Friday, the 4th.
that would be perfect.
That would be great. Would have been great if it were, Thursday the 3rd. But I think the key thing, and this was in the Pete Thamel story I read earlier, is the quote, but they've always been on a separate timeline from Colorado and Arizona, which both had meetings with the Big 12 in which both had meetings with the Big 12 in recent months before jumping aboard. So there's probably just some things that have to get hashed out, but there's just been so much reporting, like when you have Dennis Dodd coming out and saying, expect ASU to be next, then at this point you can't and there's a bunch of other reports that are similar to that. It just seems like all the kind of wheels are in motion, whether it be in the Big 12 or in the Big 10, adding the Northwest schools, that ASU will wind up in the Big 12. And that is good for ASU. So thank you for listening. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh. Do you have anything to add as we wrap this up?
No. I was just scrolling through Twitter and I found the video of Herm Edwards, Ray Anderson, and Michael Crow after the why am I blanking? The MAC team.
Eastern Michigan.
There
team that ran for like 300 yards against us. Yeah.
Yeah. I just found that video on Chris Cartman's Twitter and I was watching it and the sound blared. But how far? I guess not how far we've come, but that feels like forever ago.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to talk about that right now. That makes me sad, Colton. We'll talk about football more on upcoming episodes. It seems like the quarterback battle between Drew Pine and Trenton Bourguet is kind of heating up, and both guys have done well, so that should be interesting. But until then, thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe, rate and review on your podcast platform of choice. And as always, go Devils, even though we're in the Big 12.